everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Kickstarter Weekly. This week's episode is going to cover games that are completing their funding between October the 10th and the 16th. And I believe all 5 of our games this week are on Kickstarter. If you haven't been here before, then welcome. Good to see you. In these videos, I talk at the top about the games that I've played since the last video. I'll talk about games a little bit, usually give them my scores. Then I will go over all of the campaigns that are funding, crowdfunding campaigns for board games, obviously, that are funding in the following week, in the coming week. My personal tastes tend to favor heavy Euros and exploratory adventure games like dungeon crawlers. I am also looking for lighter games, but I have fewer of those games in my collection. So when I am recommending one of those, when I highlight one of those, usually it's really popping for me in some way. Like I think the gameplay is just above and beyond, or it's a gorgeous game, something like that. So I do tend to highlight less lighter games. I'll also usually reveal which games from the previous week I personally backed, and then I'll talk about any games that have arrived that I've acquired since the last video. So either retail games that have shipped out or crowdfunding games that have delivered. I believe I have 4 of those to mention today. The best way to support the channel right now is to like and subscribe. I'm going to keep these videos coming once a week for the foreseeable future. I'm also in the process of finalizing an upstairs studio space, and there's several things that kind of have to happen for that. We've gone through a process. There's still some more process to go. Once that does happen, I'm going to be returning to producing a lot more teach and review videos, and I'll have new equipment, so it'll be on a much higher caliber. I also plan to launch a streaming channel by the end of the year, hopefully, fingers crossed, on Twitch. And at that point, I'll be doing campaign games, some solo stuff, and some heavy Euros. Also, once that studio space is completed around the end of the year, I will be producing my top, I haven't decided yet, probably 25, top 30 games, starting with 2020. So I've been kind of compiling that list for a while. I am still working through that list. Usually at the end of the videos, I'll put a number up there that shows how many games I have left in my 2020 list to play before I feel I can produce the 2020 list. I'm down to 1 game. So that will be done soon. I'll start going through and making sure I've played any 2021 games that I need for that list. And my guess is I will have all of those games played by the time the studio space is ready. So I'll probably just produce that list for 2020, then again for 2021. And then I may be ready to do it for 2022. We'll see. So I imagine that around the time that, this is all kind of coming together, the Twitch channel is up, there will be 3 years of top 25 lists I'll be producing. And probably around that time, I'll also be launching a Patreon. At that point, if you'd like to help support the channel that way, you can. And I will be using a lot of polls from that Patreon to determine which games that are coming in, and also which older games I will be doing teach and reviews for first. Right now, I have a lot of backlog games coming in because of the pandemic. So I think for the next 6 months or so, I have like 10 games at least coming in a month. Once we hit June of 2023, it slows down to like maybe 4 games a month, but that's assuming I don't back anything more. So there's lots of good stuff coming in, lots of new content for the next year that we'll get to choose from and figure out which games I should be doing teach and reviews for and which games you'd like to see streaming. So all of that content is coming. Again, the best way to support the channel right now, if you're liking what you're watching and or what I have planned for the future, like and subscribe. That said, let's get moving with the rest of this video. I've got 6 games that I've played, although I played some of them multiple times, and some of them are actually games that I've played before and I know fairly well. So I'm going to be talking about those, and I will give you my scores. Also, when I get to the campaigns, if there's anything that I'm talking about that interests you, you can go down into the description section, and I have links to all of the campaigns that I'm talking about. My videos are always bookmarked and tabbed, so if there's anything specific that you want to hear, maybe you just want to hear about the campaigns, or maybe you just want to hear about the games that I've played and what I think of them, you can always use the tabs to go to those specific sections and those specific games. So I've got 6 played games to talk to you about today. The first of those is Barrage, and I actually had someone message me from Instagram recently. She also lives in Los Angeles. I think she was excited to see somebody who really liked to play games who lived in Los Angeles, because she was feeling that while some of her friends like to play games with her, it's not enough. She doesn't get enough games played to sate her hunger for game playing. And, I feel that way too sometimes. I like to play games a lot more than some of my friends. So we've been playing a lot of games together in the last week online. All of these actually were played online with her. The first game is Barrage, and we've played it twice. Now, I backed this one on Kickstarter. When the Kickstarter was running, I went all in. I got all of the stuff, including the elevated board. The actual physical components for the wheels in this game, because it's a very heavy worker placement game. You're going to be constructing dams and power plants and conduits, and then there's water that comes through various waterways, and you're trying to harness that water to get power that will allow you to score points and fulfill contracts that'll give you bonuses, yada, yada, yada. As you're doing this, though, when you create a structure, whether it's a conduit or a power station or a bridge or an elevation that goes on top of the bridge, you're going to be using various excavators is one of them. I forget the other components called, but you'll put them into this wheel. And you'll also need a tile that shows the type of structure that you're building. As you build more structures and use more components, you'll put more things in the wheel and it will turn. So over a period of time, as you're building more things and turning the wheel, things will come back up out of the wheel and you'll get those components and those tiles back, which then will allow you to construct more of those things. It's a pretty cool system. But when they first produced this, they had these cardboard wheels, and as you would turn them, the cardboard spokes of the wheels would often go over the components, and the components would get lodged underneath. That's not great. It's not a fun thing to play with. It's fiddly and annoying. But more importantly, sometimes the components, you might become confused as to which tile they go with. Was it on the top or the bottom of the spoke? So they did another campaign for these wooden wheels. I did get those. I haven't played the physical copy yet with those wooden wheels. I only played it once with the cardboard wheels, and then the pandemic happened. And so I didn't get a chance to play it again with some of my friends who liked really heavier games, and we haven't come back to the physical copy since then. So I now played it twice online. I love the game. Vital Lacerda is probably my favorite designer of all time. This is not designed by Vital, it's designed by Tommaso Battista, but it reminds me a lot of a Lacerda game. There is a lot going on, and the mechanisms are all kind of interconnected and related, so you need to have a good plan early on, and oftentimes good plans in the beginning will become great plans by the end of the game. But if you do things early on that aren't really sound, you may never really get up and running and catch your opponents, your competitors who are doing well. It's also a game with a lot of interconnections between all of the actions. And so once you understand the game and you know it, there is great joy to be had in planning things well and pulling off great chain moves, where you do one or two things well that allows you to do more things. I really like games like that. I think that's why I like Heavy Euros so much. They just have an opportunity for creating these grand plans with huge payoffs that are kind of beyond what's available in lighter games with simpler mechanics. I do like those games as well, but there's something to be said for these heavier games that really allow you to do great planning moves that require lots of thinking. I know that's not for everybody. Not everybody wants to do heavy thinking while they're playing board games, but for me, it's my joy. I love it. So I really did enjoy our games of Barrage a lot. The first game, I made a lot of mistakes. I forgot how a couple things work. The second game, I was more on my game, and I did fairly well, and I made some good choices and had a good experience as of the kind that I've been talking about recently. You always get to choose a character, and then there's this kind of an advisor who has a special power. Because I have the Kickstarter edition, I have a lot of extras. I also have a physical board where it sits higher on the table in 3 different levels. The idea is that these power plants and the water obviously are flowing downhill. So there are three kind of different subsections of terrain. There's like a mountains, like a midlands, and a lowlands. So I have the version physically where the different sections of the board are actually elevated. It's a really cool idea. I don't think it was really implemented that well, but it's still kind of cool. But I would like to play more of this, and I'm sure I will. I don't think my score will change too much unless it goes up. Although for now, I'm giving it a 9.0. I really do like the game a lot. And I think if anyone else out there is a huge fan of Heavy Euros and you haven't played this one yet, you owe it to yourself to seek it out, give it a play, and you can always do that on Board Game Arena. That's where I played all of these games I'm going to be talking about in this section today. Now, I played Barrage twice. I only played Caverna once. And I played Agricola when I was just starting to get into modern board games, probably around 2014. And it was so tight. It was so tight. My now wife is a vegetarian, and we made jokes about how she kept having to kill all the animals every turn just to provide food for her family. She wasn't particularly happy about that. But Agricola is just so damn tight. I think maybe too tight for my tastes. So I'd heard that Caverna was similar, but a lot more open, a lot more options, giving you different things that you can do so you don't get boxed into a corner as much. I will say that this person I met, her name's Amanda, I think she wanted to play Caverna, and I had a lot of stuff going on, so I didn't really get a chance to look at the rule book. I glossed over it quickly, but I was kind of trying to figure out as I was playing. And so some of my experiences are definitely because of that. I plan on going and reading the rule book, having a more thorough understanding of the game, and then coming back to it. But I will say that my first impression is, I'm not sure if this is my game, actually. In a lot of games, I like that feeling of building something and seeing how these mechanisms all kind of work together and going for various goals. In Caverna, I felt less that I was going for goals and more that I was trying to stop the bleeding or plug a hole. And again, some of that may be because I was figuring out as I went. I think some of that's also inherent in the game itself. And definitely I'll play it again and I'll talk more about it again, and I will upgrade my thoughts on the game and my score. But I don't enjoy games as much where it feels like you're just staving off some kind of painful situation, and that's kind of what Caverna felt like to me. I think once I learn it better, there'll be more joy in terms of pursuing different paths and finding which things I want to build. I did watch a tutorial video before I started playing, and there were some techniques that guy was using, and I kind of borrowed some of those techniques in my game, so I was able to get a good engine up and running early on and get a lot of wood, stone, and the black coal income coming kind of throughout the game. So that was very helpful. I think if I hadn't done that, I would have painted myself into a corner and just been feeling nothing but pain. I don't think I know the game well enough yet to break from that and explore other things. I need to read the rulebook more and go over it. But for now, I'm sorry to say, I'm only going to be giving Caverna a 6.5. Now, that is generally a game that I enjoyed, and I'd play it again if someone asks. And I probably would enjoy my play while we're playing it, but it's not a game that I would seek out to play or a game that I would recommend to other people. Again, I will read the rule book thoroughly. I will play it again. I will update my experience and my score in the future, but for now I've got Caverna at a 6.5. We played 2 games of Great Western Trail, and this is a game that I played early on, back in 2014. It was probably the first really heavy game that I played. I think the first one was Scythe, but I don't really consider that a heavy game. And I've always liked Great Western Trail. Now, I know a lot of people say that the cow strategy is overpowered and you really only want to go cow to your detriment if you don't. But I've also seen people do huge winning strategies, building buildings and things like that. If you don't know the game, it is a deck builder. It's sort of Western themed. I wouldn't call it worker placement because you're not blocking any spaces. So even though you are moving a meeple and activating buildings as you land on them, I'd really consider it more probably action selection than worker placement. And the idea is that you're going through this landscape of buildings. There aren't a lot in the beginning, but players can build more buildings as the game progresses. And they're kind of progressing along this board. And then when they get to the end of the board, they get to turn in all of the different cow cards they have in their hand. So if you have multiples of a kind, you're only going to count one of them. So you want to have a hand full of different kinds of cow cards every time you get to the end. And then there are various mechanisms you deal with, and you score points. And you're able to put a little disc out on a railroad track where it depends on how many cow points you have at that point. So you want to get as many as possible. So as you kind of go around the board many times, you're going to be building up this hand of cards, trying to get more powerful cards and different cards. There are also some ways to remove some of the lower cards from your hand, depending on how you sort of build your engine up. And it's a fun kind of engine building game. As the game goes on, there are going to be more buildings, so there are going to be more things that you can do as you go through this board that will also slow your progress. There are also upgrades that you can make that will allow you to take more spaces for every action that you have. So you can go, 3 buildings at a time in the beginning, up to 5 buildings at a time later. I say at a time because that allows you to progress more than one space. You can say, I'm not going to activate the first 2 buildings, I'm just going to go to the 3rd building and trigger that. Now, as those buildings get built up all over the board, your progress will be slowed, but you can upgrade your meeple ability so they can pass over more buildings at a time. You can also build buildings where they land on it and they can take an action or 2 and then continue moving. So by the end of the game, sometimes, even though more buildings are out, you can cycle this board very quickly depending on how you've built your engine. And that's really the key to the game. You want to loop the board as many times as you can, and every time you loop the board, you want to have a good variety of cards in your hand that score a lot of points. So there are cowboys that you can get and put on your player board. You can buy these characters at certain buildings. They will allow you to purchase more and better cow cards when you go to the cow market. The idea here thematically is that you're accumulating cows and then you're selling them at market and they go off on the railroad. Kind of historically what was going on in the early 1900s with ranchers. You've also got engineers that you can place, and as you do that, you will be able to move your train forward. That's a whole other mechanic where you can score some ongoing bonuses from tiles that your engine goes by and lands on if you have the money to pay for them. And you can also place your disc out and pay to do that, and that will also score your points at the end of the game. And then you've got your builders that will allow you to build more and more powerful buildings. So as you play the game, you may have goals in your mind. You may want to get cowboys and purchase more cow cards because that's how you're scoring points every round or every time you circuit the board. But there are also choices to be made. Sometimes there's not a lot of these ranchers that come out, these cowboys, and so you have to figure out other things to do. Maybe you decide to go into the builder strategy or the engineer strategy. When we played in the second game, I did really well. It might be my highest scoring game ever. I'll have to check on that. But I went more into engineers, and it worked pretty well for me. Now, I really like Great Western Trail. I do have the expansion, Rails to the North. I've played it a couple of times. I've been a little bit on the fence about whether to get the new second edition. It's from a new publisher. They've made a couple of changes. In the original version of the game, there are Indian tiles that come out, and that was deemed culturally insensitive because it is. And so on the newer version, they've got cowboys that replace the Indians. Not a huge deal, it doesn't really change gameplay, and even the effects on the board is minimal. It's just a little bit of a different graphic design in some places. However, they have not published Rails to the North for the new second edition. So for now, I'm still holding on to my old first edition. They're also publishing 2 new games in the series. So these are sequels, standalone games. I believe they're both going to be designed by Alexander Pfister. The new one is out soon. It's called Great Western Trail Argentina. I'll definitely be picking that one up because I like Alexander Pfister in general. He's one of my favorite designers. And I'm really curious to see what he does with a whole new kind of take on this game. It's going to be similar, I think, in theming and what you're doing in some ways, but it's going to be a completely different standalone game, so it's not an expansion. I hope I like it as much as I like the original Great Western Trail, which I am giving a 9.0, the same as Barrage. Lost Ruins of Arnak we played 3 times, and this is a hybrid between deck building and worker placement. It's one of those games that I think I felt a little frustrated with early on because I really like to go for goals in the game. And so I always wanted to go up this track. You have 2 different markers that you can move up a certain track. You do this by paying resources. One marker, the one that needs to always be in the lead, if it gets to the top, you're going to score big points. The other marker has to follow it, and as you move that up, you'll get assistance, and your assistance will become more powerful, and you can use those assistants every round and trigger them, and they'll give you kind of bonus abilities or bonus resources. Now, there's also deck building. You're going to get a hand of cards every turn. As you do that, you'll use those cards to get more resources and also for their icons so that you can place workers out on the board. The workers will visit various sites. When they do, you're going to have to pay resources to access that site, but when they do, they will reveal a monster. Now you're going to need to have certain resources or certain icons to defeat that monster. If you do it on the turn that you go there, you will get the monster back, and that monster will usually give you some kind of reward. And then in future rounds, players can use that space as a worker placement space for the resources that are there, which are generally more powerful or a greater number of resources than in the kind of introductory 5 resource spaces at the bottom of the board that you'll only want to be using probably in the first round or 2, unless you absolutely need something that you can't get somewhere else. So the idea here is that you're going into these sites, you're revealing these monsters, killing these monsters, and then you're enabling more powerful worker placement spaces to be using later in the game. If you don't manage to kill that monster, then at the end of the round, you get your meeple back, but you also have to take an additional fear card. Fear cards, everyone starts with 2 of them. They allow you to go to those very intro spaces, but they're also worth -1 points at the end of the game each. So you want to get those out of your hand by the end of the game, if at all possible. I always tend to pursue those goals, so I'm always trying to go up that track, which is not always the best thing to do. And if you pursue that track, although there's a lot of points at the end, it will also limit what else you can do in the game. It's one of those games where between the worker placement spaces and killing of the monsters, the tracks, and the different cards that come out that you can buy, and there are 2 kinds. Some of them you'll buy with money, others you'll buy with compasses, and those cards are fewer at the beginning of the game, and then as the rounds go on, more and more of those cards come out and less of the money cards come out. Those cards, which are called artifact cards, you're going to pay compasses for them, and you'll be able to trigger them immediately. And then when they cycle back and come out, later in the game, you'll have to pay a scroll, which is a resource, to use that card again. I think sometimes I have in the past, and people I know have not taken huge advantage of those artifact cards because it requires so many scrolls to activate. And if you're using those scrolls to activate those artifact cards, you're not going to have them to move up those tracks. So I think I felt a little bit frustrated early on the first couple times I played this because it's hard to do everything in this game. But that's something you just need to accept because the game is so much fun. And I think ultimately it's just one of those games that gives you a lot of choices. And you're not going to be able to do everything, but depending on what's happening in the game, it allows you to zig and zag and choose different strategies based on what's happening on the game board. And I think that needs to be embraced by players so they don't get frustrated. Another piece of advice I give to players is that those artifact cards, which can be pretty powerful, but when you try to use them later in the game after you buy them the first time, you will need scrolls to activate them each time, which means you won't have those scrolls for the worker placement sections when you're trying to kill a monster, if the monster has that. More importantly, though, there are lots of scrolls needed to go up those tracks on the side of the board that will score you a lot of points if you get to the top. So in the games that I've played, I think a lot of people sort of don't pay too much attention to the artifact cards because they think they need those scrolls to go up that track. My advice would be get the artifact cards anyway, because when you buy them, you're going to get to use them without paying a scroll, and usually they're pretty powerful. And then later on, when they come in your hand, if you don't have the scrolls to trigger them, you can use that card as one of the workers placement icons to place a worker on, and then you'll be able to use your other cards for their resources. So you don't have to use that card every time it comes up with the scroll to do the ability. You can still use it for other things. And on top of that, those artifact cards have endgame points attached to them. So don't pass by those artifact cards, and don't worry about if you can't use them by paying a scroll every time they cycle through your deck. Lost Ruins of Arnak, though, is so much fun. It is a beautiful game physically on the table. There's a great combination between deck building and worker placement. It came out about the same time as Dune Imperium, and it got a lot of comparisons to that because they just shared both of those mechanics. But the games themselves are really not the same at all. Dune Imperium feels more like a war game because there is a war game element, and it's a race for points. And then it's got the worker placement and the deck building. Whereas this game really feels like the worker placement and especially the deck building are front and center. And I can't explain it better, but there is so much happiness and joy around those mechanics and the art in the game and the way everything works together. When you are able to do something that chains into other things because of the resources that you're getting and the powers attached, it's a great feeling. So I really, really love Lost Ruins of Arnak. It doesn't have quite the same amount of crunch that I like in my games, like Barrage or Great Western Trail. So I think for me, Lost Ruins of Arnak is going to come in at an 8.5. But I would like to just say that playing the game is kind of pure happiness, and I would recommend it to anyone. And the other thing about this game, I think, is that there are so many good choices, and there's this engine building, and it's pretty crunchy. So I think it really will satisfy heavier gamers. At the same time, what's happening in the game is not that complex in terms of explaining it or grasping it. So I think it's a game that lighter gamers who don't want to get their brain burned out, maybe at the end of a busy, hardworking day, this shouldn't be too much for them either. So it's a game I think kind of all gamers can enjoy. And as I said, it's pure fun, so there's really no reason to pass this one by. We also played a game called PI, which I actually had known nothing about, and I discovered that it's a Martin Wallace game, and Martin Wallace is one of my favorite designers, but I know him as the designer of the Brass games, Railways of the World, Age of Steam, and Australia. And, those often have these really kind of punishing loan systems, and they're kind of heavy, crunchy Euros. PI is a lighter deduction game, and I don't love deduction games. Usually they're just kind of too simple, but I figured let's give it a try. It's Martin Wallace, and the board looks really cool. The idea here is that you're trying to solve cases. There are 3 rounds, so you're solving a case in each round. And like Clue, you're trying to figure out who did it, where they did it, and instead of the murder weapon, you're trying to figure out the crime. So it could be murder, it could be blackmail, it could be one of a number of things. And there are all these different spaces on the board. Now you have 5 investigators to use over 3 rounds. So that means that you'll have at least 1 round probably where you're only using 1 investigator. And the way this works is you will put out an investigator on the board, and then if either the crime, the location, or the person are on that space, or in any of the adjacent spaces, you'll get a token placed on the investigator. And because you're looking for 3 different things, you could get 3 tokens placed on your investigator. So that narrows down things a little bit. Also, in your hand, you will have the person, the location, and the crime for somebody else's solution. So you'll have all 3 of those things. So if you're playing a 2-player game like we did, I had all the things that were Amanda's solution, and she had all the things that were mine. That means any other cards that you see that come out, you can immediately cross off your list because you know those aren't your answers. What you're going to do then, once you kind of narrow down on the board, there's a kind of market row of cards, and every turn you'll be able to either place one of those investigators. Remember, you only get 5 for the whole game. You'll either place that out and get some tokens attached, or you will choose one of the cards, and you will then find out the cards are specific. So it's either for one of those 3 things, not all. You'll have a card for a specific person or a specific location or a specific crime. And so you'll pull that card, and then you'll find out if it's adjacent to that card. And then you might get some tokens placed out there as well. So it plays a lot like Clue, where you're using like a logic tree to try to deduct by everything you know it's not what it is. And I think once I got into the game a little bit more and I realized any cards that you see are not yours, so you can cross those off. And also just the strategy of the game in terms of where you place your investigators and try to get a kind of a good central location, and then from there use cards to refine, what it isn't. I enjoy the game. It's a little light for my taste. It's not something I'd probably pull out, but I did enjoy playing it. I would play it again, and I think with the right group of people and the right circumstances, it could be a hell of a lot of fun, almost like a party game with a little more going on. So for me, this one's going to come in at a 6.5, the same as Caverna. I do expect Caverna to go up over time as I learn it better. PI, my understanding of the game, even after one play, is very solid. So I think that's where it would sit for me. Probably the only thing that would change that up is playing at a higher player count and just seeing if the mass chaos and craziness of all those players, because it would mean that as players use cards, if it's something that doesn't have anything attached, it goes into their discard, which then limits what you can choose to try to figure out what's going on for a use. So if you're playing with a lot of players, a lot of cards that you may need to try to figure out, where the things around that are, if they're related to you or not, those cards may go away as other players use them. And it may get very difficult to figure out, what your solution is. I'm interested and curious to see how it plays at a higher player count. I think it's possible it could make it a lot more fun. I think it's also possible it could make it a little bit more frustrating because you may have to guess at your solution more. I don't know that for sure. I'd need to play it more at a higher player count. But for now, for my one-time play with 2 players, I'm going with the 6.5. And I will say, because these deduction games aren't really kind of my thing, if you do like these kinds of games, I think this is one of the best ones I've played. So your score for it may be significantly higher. Now, I did back Mind Management recently, and I have that coming, and it's similar in the terms of it being a deduction game, but with a lot more going on. I'm curious to see where PI will compare with Mind Management in my mind. But I think those 2 games are probably a good comparison to each other. And the makers of Mind Management have another game that's on Kickstarter right now called Harrow County, designed by Jay Cormier. So if you like those kinds of games, you may want to check out that Kickstarter campaign. And it is likely that that is a campaign that I will be profiling in a future video when it is coming time for that campaign to complete its funding. So the last game that I played this period is Wingspan. We played it twice. This is a game that I own. I've played it a bunch of times, and I enjoy it in general. It was fun to get to play it again. I haven't played it in a while. And I will also say I hear a lot of people loving Wingspan. I also hear a lot of people saying that Wingspan isn't that great, or it's really swingy, or it's very luck-based. And my experiences playing Wingspan, I think, answered some of those questions for me, because I had a lot of difficulty getting the right cards to do what I wanted to do to fulfill goals. And as I've said before, I'm very kind of goal-oriented. So if you're playing a game where there's kind of a goal for every round, that's what I'm focusing on. I'm focusing on that, and I'm focusing on my own goal cards to the exclusion of everything else. And I think in our first game, literally I couldn't get the cards that I needed. I kept drawing so many cards. I had a ridiculous number of cards, but it wasn't the right kinds of birds that I needed for my own goals or for the round goals. And then I kept trying to get food to at least play some birds, and I could never get the food that I needed either. And I think probably people that complain a lot about Wingspan being swingy or luck-based or having problems are experiencing that situation. And the person that I was playing with said to me, don't be so focused on goal cards. And I really took that to heart. And in our second game, I stopped doing that. And here's the thing about Wingspan. Every time you cache a piece of food on a bird, every time you tuck a card under a bird, all the eggs that you have laid out on the board, all of those things are going to score points by the end of the game. So I think I've now learned my lesson with Wingspan. It's more so than with Lost Ruins of Arnak. I think I kind of took in this lesson into Lost Ruins of Arnak, and it helped me a little bit in that game. But with Wingspan in particular, if things aren't going your way and you're not able to pursue those goal cards, there are so many other things you can do in the game you might not realize. There are ways to get more goal cards if you select certain birds. In our second game, I had like 3 or 4 goal cards, and that really scored me a lot of points. Also, you're going to get points for the birds that you place out, and there is a huge range of those scores. So you can just start pursuing birds that score a lot of points. You can also just start pursuing cards that allow you to cache food on them, or cards that allow you to tuck cards underneath, which will help you. Usually if you tuck a card underneath, a lot of birds will then allow you to draw a new card. So it helps you cycle through the deck more and maybe get to a card that you need. But even if you don't, you're putting all of these cards underneath that card, which will score you a lot of points at the end of the game. Or producing eggs. And some birds allow you to produce more eggs when you play them, or eggs when you activate them. A lot of these birds have activation abilities. So once you've placed them, if you do the sort of action that is in their row, which is either laying eggs, getting food, or drawing cards, when you do those things, you're going to be activating the powers on those birds. So often you can then use that as your engine to score a lot of points. I think I won our second game, not by that many points though, but I was having trouble scoring some of those goals and scoring my own goal cards. So I did things to get more goal cards, and I scored a lot of points in other various ways. And I think now, understanding that that is a healthy part of the game and a good strategy, I think I'll have a better time playing Wingspan and maybe not feeling so limited to what I can do. And if you're in a similar boat, you might want to try that and give Wingspan another chance. It's like Lost Ruins of Arnak, it is just an inherently fun game to play. And now I understand, I think, better how many other ways there are to be competitive in that game and not just kind of have your head down and pursuing the goals for the round or your own goal cards. So I'm going to give a score to Wingspan of an 8.5, and I think that's a pretty solid score. I think most of my scores this week, except for Caverna, are pretty locked in because I've played these games previously and I'm just coming back to them again now and playing them more times. So here are all these scores for the games that I played this week. I'm going to be on a little trip for my wife's birthday and the anniversary of our meeting next week. So I don't anticipate to be able to play too many games for next week's video. However, I am playing a couple more games of Descent Legends of the Dark tomorrow. And so I'll be reporting back in on that in the next video. I think at this point, I've talked about it before and I don't want to talk about it too much. I don't want to say the same things over and over, but I will briefly mention it. I'll kind of update our score where it's at. I believe we have 6 scenarios left to play, and we'll be playing 2 of those tomorrow. And that means we'll have 2 game days left, 4 scenarios total. Once we finish it, the friend that I'm playing it with, Ryan, I think he and I are going to do a joint review, but we may wait to do that until the end of the year when I have the studio space and the better equipment. But that probably is coming. All right, now the first campaign that I'm going to be looking at today is for a game called Age of Inventors. This one had a minimum required funding goal of $15,000. It's currently at $56,000, which is almost 4 times that minimum required funding goal. Age of Inventors is going to complete its funding on Monday, October the 10th. So if you're watching this video over the weekend, you may want to make a decision on this one first. It's the first one that's going to complete its funding of the 5 games that I'm looking at today. This is a game for 1 to 4 players, plays in about 40 to 80 minutes. The complexity on the game is in the medium area, but I think I'm going to go medium light. It's basically just a resource accumulation and management game. There's a few other things going on, but it's very much a resource management engine. And we're going to set the risk associated with this campaign at high. Now, there is a lot of resource management in this game. It's primarily probably, though, a worker placement game. That's the main mechanic. There's also action selection happening, and it is a low point scoring game. Alex over at Board Game Co. did a very good job of looking at the game. He made a video about it, and one of the things that he says in that video is that it's a low scoring game, like 15 to 20 points. There are times where you pull little point chits out of a bag that could be, a few points. So if that's 1 point, or I don't know if it goes as high as 4, at least as high as 3. But when you're talking about a game where the point totals are 15 points, pulling a 1 or a 3 randomly can represent, you know, a big difference in your final points. So the game looks fun, and there's some kind of cool engine building and resource management going on. But I think people should be aware, if it's something that they're interested in, that it is a low-scoring game. There is luck involved with it, and it is not a super crunchy game. It's a more of a lighter game, but it's got really cool silkscreen meeples that you're moving around on the table, and I think the game overall looks pretty good, you know, physically, table presence, production. Now, it's got 3 designers on it. The first is named Aeolus, who has designed a game named Alois, Theosis, and USS Freedom. So those are 3 different games. Iskios is the second designer, who also worked on USS Freedom. And the third designer is named Vanton. The artist on the game, Mike Cataglau, has previously worked on Deus Ex Machina and USS Freedom. And the game is being published by MeeplePug. Now, this is their first game, their first Kickstarter, which is why we are setting the risk associated with this campaign at high. There are only 2 pledges for this one. Very simple, no add-ons. For $49, you can pledge Inventor Core. That's going to get you the core version of the game. As we said, it's mainly a resource management game, and at that level, the resources that you're going to be getting are these little plastic gems. You've probably seen them in other games, but these are very kind of cheap versions of these plastic gems. If you pledge at $59, which is the Innovator Deluxe pledge, those little cheap plastic gems will be upgraded to wooden resources. Shipping in the continental US has been estimated at a range of $15 to $25. So I don't believe this is a case where the lower pledge is $15 and the more expensive is $25. I think they're just giving us a range of $15 to $25 because they're not sure where shipping rates are going to be at when this thing eventually gets made and sent out. So just for the sake of highballing, I always just go with the higher amount. So when I'm looking at my pledges, I just assume $25. And neither of these 2 pledges are very different. You're just getting wooden resources instead of these gems. Wooden resources do weigh a little bit more, but not enough to really increase the shipping, which is again why I think that range is just applicable to both. I think whichever version you get, the shipping for that will be somewhere in that range, and both of those pledges will probably have almost the same shipping. Finally, MeeplePug is planning on delivering Age of Inventors in September of 2023. Fateforge Chronicles of Kaan had a minimum required funding goal of $40,000. They're currently at $153,000 as I record this video, which is just about 4 times that minimum required funding goal. A little bit less, but a little bit more than Age of Inventors, which was even a little bit lower than their 4-time mark. Fateforge is going to complete its funding on Tuesday, October the 11th. This is a game for 1 to 4 players. The time that it takes to play the game is a little bit wonky for this game. It's a big kind of adventure game, so you can be playing it for a while. You can put it away, you can come back to it. So they don't really have a playtime for a session, but as you're playing the game, and it's also app dependent, like you're going to be using an app with this game. But as you play the game, you're going to be dealing with sort of narrative situations where you're going to be doing some reading or listening and making decisions. And usually those parts of the game, let's call them modules, take 10 to 15 minutes. You'll also be having combat situations, and those parts of the game take 20 to 30 minutes. So I guess if you're sitting down and you're just playing one module, depending on if it's a story element or a combat element, it could take 10 to 30 minutes. But I think most people won't be just doing one little thing. They'll probably sit down and play the game for a while and do several story things, several combats. Complexity on the game appears to be medium heavy, and we're going to set the risk associated with this campaign at medium low. Now, this is a cooperative game. As I said, it is app driven, app required, and it's an action adventure RPG like board game. So it's kind of a fantasy type environment. You're going to have different classes of characters. They'll have different abilities that they can use when they're fighting. And I think the thing that makes this game unique is you're going to have player screens. You're going to roll dice behind the player screens, and then those dice will determine what actions that you can take through an action selection mechanism during that round of combat for your character. Some characters will allow the other characters to see their dice. but many characters will not. So that'll be hidden information. And you can do some amount of table talk to let your friends know what kinds of things that you're going to be doing, but you can't reveal for most of the characters exactly what actions you'll be taking. It gives a little bit more of the cooperative element of the working together, some of its feels, because there are these kind of unknown elements you'll be needing to work to overcome. So not everyone will know what everyone else can or is going to be doing ahead of time. It'll add to the puzzle element of the game. Now, it's designed by Gordon Kaleha, who's previously designed Excavation Earth, Posthuman, and Vengeance. Artists on the game include Antonio Muntian, Yamadou, Danielle Orsi, who previously worked on Guildmaster, and Arjuna Susini, who's previously worked on Posthuman and Posthuman Saga. The game is being published by Mighty Boards. They're probably best known for Days of Ire, Budapest 1976, Excavation Earth, and Petrichor. This is another simple campaign with only 2 pledge levels and no add-ons. For $99, you can pledge the Adventurer's Pledge. That's going to give you the core box of the game, a free boss miniatures set that's really coming with any pledge, and a PDF of the Fateforge Encyclopedia. So it's going to give you like entries and flavor for a lot of the world of the game. If you pledge at the $128 level, which is the Emperor's Pledge, you're going to add on an expansion. It's called the Clash of the Immortals Deluxe Expansion, and that's going to give you a new hero, a new boss, a new gameplay mechanic, and then a lot of other things like new floor plans, scene tiles, quests, weapons, rest locations, items, and enemies. So it's one of these expansions that gives you some new stuff in terms of the boss, the hero, and the mechanic, but then it also adds in just a lot of new stuff to the game to give it some more life, so that as you're playing it, you'll also be seeing some more things. It won't be just the same things getting recycled over and over. Shipping in the continental US has been estimated at $24 or $26 depending on your pledge. So in this case, it's not a range. It is specific for each of those 2 pledge levels. And as with Age of Inventors, Mighty Boards is planning on delivering this game, Fateforge Chronicles of Kaan, in September of 2023. From there, we go to a game called Nexus Infernum, the Heretical Reprinting. Now, this is a reprinting, so their minimum required funding goal is very small. It was only $700. They're currently at $2,400, which is 3.5 times that minimum. It's not a lot of money, but they did hit their minimum, and they are funded. Also keeping in mind that this is a game that has been produced before, so they're just printing up new copies, but this isn't something that needs to be designed and play tested, and production doesn't need to be tweaked. They're just making more copies. Nexus Infernum is also going to complete its funding on Tuesday, October the 11th. This is a game for 2 to 5 players, plays in about 45 to 90 minutes. Complexity on the game is light, and we're going to set the risk associated with this campaign at medium low. Now, this is a dice rolling and worker placement game where you're going to be putting resources out on various tiles. There's a little area majority as far as that goes, and you're going to be then summoning skeletons to help you protect your resources and maybe fight other players' skeletons. The art on this game is very specific. I think you're either going to hate it or love it. It's very dark. Everything about it is dark. The board is dark. But I love the graphic design, the kind of the art style to it. You may be more familiar with a game called Eschaton, which is by the same people, the same publisher, all the same designers and artists. That game is much like Tyrants of the Underdark, where you're putting out all these minions and you're trying to get area control of different spaces around the board. I actually do own that game. It's very, very well produced, and it has that same kind of art style, which gives it a lot of table presence and really makes it stand out. Now, I think some people might not like that art style, but it does fit the theme of both games really, really well. And it does have a lot of table presence. It does really, really pop. It's also very dark. So if you don't like dark stuff, you may not like it. Now, this is a team of designers who are kind of the group at this publisher. They're all working together, making games together. Very kind of singular production in terms of what they're putting out thematically and in look. So the first of those designers is named Diha, and they have previously worked on Eschaton and the original first version of this game, Nexus Infernum. Petros Visnelis has worked on those same 2 games, and Adam Watts has worked on those 2 games as well, along with a game called Shindig Machine. The art on the game is by 2 of the designers, so Diha again, who's as an artist has worked on both of those 2 games, Eschaton and Nexus Infernum, and then also Adam Watts, who's worked on both of those games and also as an artist on Shindig Machine as well. And finally, the game is being published by Archon Games, who has previously published Eschaton and the first edition of Nexus Infernum. For $60, you can pledge Nexus Infernum. That's going to get you the game. And for $78, you can pledge the Portalmancer's Pledge, which will get you the game and a cloth map that you'll be able to use instead of the board. So there is one more pledge. It's $95. It's the Reliquary Pledge. That pledge level will get you the game, the cloth map, and then it will add on 3 things that are not related to the game at all. They're just kind of extra fun things. There's an enamel pin, some stickers, and a t-shirt, and also those 3 items can be added on. You can buy them as add-ons. So it'd be $10 for the enamel pin, $20 for the t-shirt, and $20 for the sticker pack. Finally, shipping has been estimated at $13, so no matter your pledge in the continental US, it's an estimated $13. And Archon Games is planning on delivering Nexus Infernum, the Heretical reprinting, in December of 2022. So this year, very soon. Next, we go to a game called Rise and Fall, which had a minimum required funding goal of $30,000. They're currently at $159,000, which is about 5.5 times that minimum required funding goal. Rise and Fall is going to complete its funding on Thursday, October the 13th. This is a game for 2 to 4 players, plays in about 40 to 80 minutes. Complexity on the game is medium light, and we're going to set the risk associated with this campaign at high. This game primarily centers on area majority and influence, although there is some deck building in it. The deck building is going to kind of work like Concordia, and you're going to have cards, and so every time you play a card, you get to use that ability, and then you don't get to use it again until you draw your cards back, which you'll do once you've played all of your cards. Now, in this game, there is a lot of these wooden meeples on the board. They represent different unit types, and every card will correspond with a different unit type. So when you play a card for that unit type, you'll get to activate all of the units on the board, and your card has a list of things that they can do. So you'll be able to choose which of those things you want to do with which unit. And so part of your goal in this game is going to be to get different types of units out. And as you bring those units out, you'll get those unit cards, and that will allow you to do more things, move more units around, but it will also give you more cards to play that you have to get through before you can take them back and then play them again. So in the beginning, you're going to be activating 2 unit types over and over and over and doing a lot of things with them. And then as you build up more unit types as the game goes on, you'll get to activate more unit types, but less frequently. The game is designed by Christoph Bollinger, who's worked on Archipelago, Dungeon Twister, and Earth Reborn, and there are a few different artists on the game. Guillaume Beauchesne, Dogan Oztel, Guillaume Tavernier, who's previously worked on Adventures in Asterion and One Card Wonder, and Sabrina Tobal, who's previously worked on Captain Sonar, Meeple Circus, and Sonar. The game's being published by Ludically, who's previously put out Archipelago, Dungeon Twister 2, Prison, and Earth Reborn. There are 3 different pledges. Each one basically just upgrades the wooden pieces that you're going to be having on the board. So the lowest pledge, you're just going to have these wooden pieces. The middle pledge will upgrade them to 3D wooden pieces. And then the highest pledge level will take those 3D wooden pieces and put like a silk screening all over them. So 3 pledges and then a couple add-ons. The first pledge is $59. It's called the Explorer's Pledge. That's just going to give you the base game with the flat version of these wooden units. For $89, the Settler's Pledge, you will get the 3D units and then all of the stretch goals. A lot of those pertain to the 3D units themselves and how they're building them and what they're adding to them. And then for $124, which is the Clan Master's Pledge, you will get those 3D units with this kind of silkscreen printing on them to make them really pop. Now, this is definitely a lighter game, although there is a little bit of crunch in terms of how you're using those actions. but it's got a lot of table presence. It looks really, really pretty, especially if you're getting the 3D wooden units with the silkscreen. For $15, you can add on something called Foreign Threats, Pirates, and Barbarians. That's going to give you a solo and co-op mode, and then 4 different AIs that you can use within your solo and co-op modes. And then for $8, you can add on Rise and Fall Online, which is basically a video game app version of the game. The shipping in the continental US for this one is again being estimated at a range, and it's $20 to $25. There's not going to really be that much weight between the 3 pledges. Certainly between the second and third, both of those come with the 3D units. So the only difference is the kind of painting, the silkscreen painting that's on that higher pledge. So there's no weight really added between those 2 levels, and probably not much weight added between the very simple wooden markers of the first pledge and the 3D units of the second and third. So I believe that $20 to $25 shipping range in the continental US it's just going to be one amount for any of the 3 games. They just don't know where it's going to fall within that range. And finally, Ludically is planning on delivering Rise and Fall in December of 2023, so that is next year. The last campaign I'm looking at today is called Terraforming Mars, the Dice Game. Now, they previously put out Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition, which is like a simpler version using cards. I mean, the main version of Terraforming Mars still uses a lot of cards, but Ares Expedition attempted to kind of break it down and make it a little bit smaller and focus even more on just the cards. So now we're getting a dice version of the game as well. This one had a minimum required funding goal of $20,000. They're currently at $310,000, so that's the highest amount of any of the games today. It's also got the highest multiplier, which is about 15.5 times that minimum required funding goal. Terraforming Mars, the dice game, is going to complete its funding on Thursday, October the 13th. This is a game for 1 to 4 players, plays in about 45 minutes. We're looking at a complexity of medium light, and we're going to set the risk associated with this campaign at medium low. Now, I assume that most people at this point have played Terraforming Mars at least once, but if you don't know what it is, it's a big engine building game. It uses a lot of cards and various mechanics, and you're trying to compete against players to populate Mars. And there's a lot of interesting ways the resource management, the various cards and things can kind of all chain together and create huge, big, interesting turns by the end of the game. There are a lot of mechanics in Terraforming Mars. There should be a lot less in this version, but definitely dice and dice rolling is going to be at the top of the list. The game is designed by Jacob Frixelius, who has designed After the Virus, Terraforming Mars, and Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition. The art on the game is by Isaac Frixelius, who has worked on Angel Fury, Brawling Barons, and the original Terraforming Mars. And the game is being published by Stronghold Games, who are probably best known for Great Western Trail, which we talked about at the top, Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition, That's Pretty Clever, and Village. And this is a very simple campaign. There's only 1 pledge level. It's $35. It's called the Dice Game. There is one add-on, however. It is $12. It is Frix Games card sleeves, and there are 200 sleeves in that pack, which I believe is enough for all the cards in this game. Now, what makes this unique, though, and why you may want to buy it if you are a sleever, is that they have a very specific, uncommon size card in this game. So the cards are 55 by 77 millimeters, and it's not a commonly seen card size. So if you want to be able to sleeve your cards, you probably want to get the sleeves through this campaign. Oh, there is one more add-on. For $25, you can get 2 neoprene game boards, which will work with like Terraforming Mars, the big box, with the tiles in that game, so you can use it for regular Terraforming Mars. And it's 2 mats, so in that game, there's 2 different boards, depending on which one you're using. You've got here a neoprene mat for both of those 2 boards. Shipping in the continental US has been estimated at $15, and Stronghold Games is planning on delivering Terraforming Mars, the dice game, in July of 2023. Now, last week I talked about 4 different campaigns. I did not back any of them. So nothing that I personally backed from last week's video. A couple things looked kind of curious to me, like Atlas Lost and Mushroom Sorcerer, but I just have too many games. I need to remove games from my collection at this point, and when I back things, it's getting tougher and tougher for me to choose something to back because I'm at a limit on space. So even if it's something that I think looks pretty cool, at this point I'm probably saying no unless it's really piquing my interest. I will say, however, though, in this week's video, there is one game I probably will back. So tune into next week's video and you'll find out which campaign that is. Finally, I did acquire 4 new games in my collection. 4 things showed up this past week. The first is a game called Block by Block Uprising, and it looked really cool to me. I think it's like an area majority game. You're doing things around the board, but it has to do with societal upset. So you're playing different groups of people, meeples, and you're rallying for social justice. And it looked a little bit different from other games that I've seen, and although it has kind of a political theme to it, the game itself doesn't feel political. It's very much about the mechanics, and it's not trying to, push a political agenda. It's just trying to make a really good game using some political themes. So it looked really cool to me. I'm really curious to get this played soon. It looks like a lot of fun, and I think this version is a second edition for them where they've gone through and tweaked some things and remade it with a higher production level. So knowing that they've already made the game once, they did a good job with it, and now they're doing a second, better version makes me even more excited. I also got Chronicles of Drunagor Age of Darkness Wave 1. So I backed this one recently. It's a big dungeon crawler campaign game. I believe the stuff that I got delivered was the original stuff. And then the Wave 2 that'll come later will be the stuff that was newer for that newer campaign. This is a game that I hope to eventually feature on the Twitch channel once I get that launched. Just a very cool, sprawling dungeon crawler that has some pretty good scores, and I'm very excited to play it. I also got John Company's second edition, which is the new game from Cole Worley and his company Whirligig Games. They did a newer version a while back of Pax Pamir, the second edition, and the production value on it was just off the charts. Amazing. They had a cloth map in that game that was so cool. Really, I'm not really into cloth maps, but the cloth map on that game was so cool, and the pieces, they look almost like butter candies, but they're just really interesting pieces that you can use for roads and units in that game. And I'm very impressed with the overall production, and I think Cole Worley, who you probably know from Root, he's designed Root and all the Root stuff for Leader Games. Fantastic designer, amazing sense of design, and so I'm very much on board for anything he makes, and he was doing a new version of John Company, much in the way they did a new version of Pax Pamir. So I'm very excited about that one. And then finally, I got in the Too Many Bones Trove chest. Not really a game, just something to put all of my Too Many Bones stuff in. I backed that along with the Unbreakable campaign, so I'll be getting more of that campaign later, but they sent out the Trove chest first. So I need to start putting all of my Too Many Bones stuff into that chest. I will say that my chest had some dings and dents, and I don't think that those Trove chests are that well made. And I had one problem with it I want to pass on to anyone, because I've seen other people talking about this, where there is a little metal piece that juts out. It's kind of like not a nail, but it's something to hold part of the crate together. And someone else mentioned that when they got it, it was sticking out from the package a little bit, and they put it down on a table and then moved it, and it scratched the table, and they didn't realize it, and then they put it on their calyx and it scratched the calyx. So I knew about that enough that I'm gonna go, probably when I shoot this video, go upstairs and get a hammer and pound that in, and I've made sure it hasn't scratched anything. But if you are someone who's looking at getting a Trove chest, or it's on its way to you, just do a check for that little metal piece so that you don't end up damaging any of your furniture. Okay, we come to the end of this video. Thank you very much for spending some time with me and watching, and hopefully there's something that I talked about, maybe one of the campaign games, that will send you over to Kickstarter and have you take a look at it and see if it's something for you. I'll be back next week with a new video. I know I'm going to be including Daybreak and Tainted Grail, Kings of Ruin, and I have 6 or 7 other games I'm considering profiling in that video as well, but it will at least be those 2 games. Until then, have a great week, play lots of great games. I plan on doing that as well. I'll talk about them next week. Be excellent to each other, and I will see you very soon. Take care.